When you first start dipping your toes into tabletop game design, one of the most common recommendations you'll see online is to read more RPGs. But one of the toughest things is, well, there's thousands of RPGs out there and all of them are pretty awesome, so where do you begin? Last week, we did a video on the top 5 role-playing games to begin that journey, the ones that you could read to really jumpstart that process. And this week, we're going to go into my 5 recommended advanced reading for your tabletop design journey. Hi, I'm Peter, creator and lead designer of Tales from Elsewhere, and I've been playing tabletop role-playing games for over 25 years now. And this YouTube channel acts as a devlog for my own design journey as I put the finishing touches on my own tabletop role-playing game, as well as a place to explore tabletop design principles and philosophy. And if that all sounds interesting to you, we release a new video every week tackling some new subject. So if you want to be notified as to when that happens, consider hitting the like and subscribe button down below and turning on bell notifications. And this week we're continuing that discussion I started last week about tabletop role-playing game reading, the study materials that'll help you along in your journey. The 5 role-playing games I'm going to present today are ones that I think are harder to get the lessons from. Not that the games themselves are more advanced or difficult or worse in any way than the previous 5 I mentioned, but that it takes a little bit more of an evolved or practiced design mind, I think, to extract the value of them. And after that, I'm going to tell you why I've left off the recent editions of Dungeons & Dragons from this list. All right, let's hop in and get to it. Recommendation number 1, Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, some people may have balked at the fact that I left Pathfinder 2nd Edition off of the first video, but my reasoning for this is very important. Pathfinder 2nd Edition is not a game that's easy to parse as a new designer. The core rulebook alone is, 600 pages. It is a very dense game. So let me give you some guidance as to what I think you should be extracting from it as you read it. The most important aspect of reading Pathfinder 2nd Edition, regardless of whether or not you're making a crunchy game or a rules-light game, is to understand that Pathfinder is meant to be played rules as written. And I know that sounds kind of maybe tautological or redundant, but here's what I mean. The engine that is Pathfinder 2nd Edition is designed to not need a lot of GM adjudication. The system itself is meant to run like a well-oiled machine. That doesn't mean the GM can't be creative and there isn't wonderful storytelling to be had, but understand that the mechanics, the structures underneath, are built to work as is in a way that crunchy RPGs sometimes can't achieve, like D&D 5e, I'd say. And that mechanical weight, that rules as written approach, empowers the players to engage with the rules system in a really meaningful way that lighter games struggle to achieve. And let me unpack that for you so you can see what I'm saying. When I'm getting ready to be a player in, say, a Brindlewood Bay session, I can imagine a really fun backstory for my little granny that I'm going to be playing and have some fun with that, but there's really not a lot of meat for me to engage with system-wise. There isn't much for me to read or become engrossed in apart from turning on reruns of Murder, She Wrote. But with Pathfinder 2nd Edition, there is an immense amount of meat for me to chew on. There's systems and synergies and abilities and spells and classes and multiclassing. There's so much for my mind to engage with outside of the session itself as a player. Because Pathfinder is very much a game about system mastery, and I mean that in a good way. It gives the players so much to think about and consider and optimize in a similar way that building fun Magic the Gathering decks can be. You spend time outside of the game itself thinking through all of these myriad combinations and optimizations you could achieve, and there's something really satisfying about that. And now remember, this list isn't about games that you would enjoy playing or even want to play. It's about becoming a more well-rounded designer once the training wheels are off, once you've gotten some groundwork done. So even if you're making a rules-light game or you really would never want to play Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you should still read it to increase your skill levels in design in general. And on that flip side, if you're making a really crunchy game, you should probably also read what is number 2 on my list, BORG. And BORG, as I've been told is probably the more accurate pronunciation, exists on the opposite end of the spectrum from Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And what you learn from it is very different from that crunchy game. This game is one of the simplest out there. The actual underlying mechanics could fit on maybe like 1 page of densely written plain text. But it's not the rules themselves that is the value of this game. So let's unpack what I mean by that. So in a game like Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the rules themselves, the machine, is what the game is. The presentation of those rules, though important, is secondary to the mechanics of it, the structure, the interplay of those systems, and so forth. But with BORG, which I'm going to probably butcher multiple times in this video, the presentation of the rules is intrinsically connected to the rules themselves. Separating them out gives you an inferior product in both directions. And this is a wildly popular structure that you've seen hacked and added onto from dozens and dozens of games since its release. The book itself is an art book, more so almost than a reference tool. It is instructing you as to a vibe, a mood, an evocation that you're supposed to replicate as you play the game. And the game itself couldn't be more simple. Understanding that dance, that interplay between rules presentation and the rules themselves and how they affect one another is a challenging lesson to learn, and one that I really struggle with as I'm not a very visual person. But if you can understand the value of BORG, it will make you a stronger designer. Even if you're not interested in ever playing Cyborg, Pirate Borg, or any of the other mods that you've seen out there, understanding that value of presentation can really level up any game that you're producing. Especially if you're like me, who just thinks in systems. I think of mechanics a lot. I also think of world and story and vibe and all that evocation, but I'm very much a systems guy. And I don't think about how I'm going to present the rules of a game until much farther down along in that process, and that's to my own detriment. I know Runehammer has talked about this before, that you should write your rules, iterate on it, in the design document itself, in InDesign or Affinity, to better train you to think about rules and the presentation of those rules as one process. And BORG is a great way to learn that. Now my third pick may be controversial, and it's Rolemaster. Now, Rolemaster is kind of notorious in the design space for its reliance on reference tables, and I think there are important lessons to learn once you're ready to start tackling reference tables versus rules. A lot of people, when they start dabbling in wounds, they make them based on random tables, roll tables, like you get reduced to 0 hit points and then you roll a d20 and it tells you how you've been hurt. And though there's nothing wrong with that inherently, making an aspect of gameplay based on a roll table or reference table can have an incremental cost. It can start to weigh on your system, and Rolemaster shows us what this looks like in the extreme. Rolemaster is probably the most reference table heavy game you will ever read. Almost everything you do in this game requires a bespoke reference table to process. You can't actually hold the system in your mind. You can't have this realistically memorized. You must always have some amount of reference tables available to process the moment-to-moment gameplay of this game. And now, I know there's lots of people that really love that, and that gameplay style isn't for me, but that doesn't mean it's not interesting to learn from, to see what it would be like to go so hard on reference tables and build out the immense amount of nuance and detail and potential immersion that such roll tables can create. And as you're reading it, marvel at that complexity, marvel and appreciate that detail, but also note just how procedurally onerous playing Rolemaster could be. Even if you've never gotten a chance to play it, take a look at just how long it would take to process given systems if you don't happen to have the proper reference table in front of you at any given moment. See how going extreme in one of these directions can start to tax a system and tax the gameplay at the table when not kept in check. And this compartmentalization, the bespoke nature of each roll table, is actually a really natural segue into my fourth pick, which is the original Apocalypse world. Apart from D20 rollover fantasy, the Powered by the Apocalypse structure is probably one of the most ubiquitous across game design, especially indie developers. And reading Apocalypse World, the original source of this structure, is a great way to see the origins, the DNA of where so many games have come from. And here's what I want you to take a look at when you're reading these. You see, Apocalypse World has compartmentalized its rules as well, but rather than being massive roll tables like in Rolemaster, Powered by the Apocalypse games have given you moves, discrete packets of rules that you simply evoke when needed. And otherwise they sit off to the side, just waiting to be used, not getting in the way of the actual storytelling at hand. So such a game is less about making attack rolls and saving throws and these global rule structures. They're more about describing what your character does in fiction and then seeing if there's a move that then applies in that given situation. And as you're reading this original version, note just how easy it is to add on to this, to hack it, because of that compartmentalization. It's why you see this everywhere in the indie space. It's a very expedient way to create a rule system without having to create a physics simulation, like a game like Pathfinder or D&D might. You're not trying to determine how the universe works through die rolls and systems in a symmetrical manner. Instead, you're just creating the necessary packets of special actions or moves that any given playbook or character might need, and letting the rest fall away. And Rolemaster and Apocalypse World I've paired purposefully because I think there's a similar lesson to be learned. It's two extremes of this same approach, attempting to packet rules into discrete blocks, but they've just approached it in very different ways. Similarly, Pathfinder 2nd Edition and MORK are ones that I've paired together because of their extremeness on either end of the spectrum. Now, my 5th recommendation is gonna be kind of a cheat. I'm gonna give a few in one. My 5th recommendation is to read a weird role-playing game or two. When I mean weird, I don't mean like bad or anything like that. I mean unconventional, highly asymmetrical, or maybe without even a GM involved. Something that really pushes the boundaries of the definition of what a tabletop role-playing game can be. And the reason this is a category rather than just a single game is because these games can often be read in a single sitting. They're usually often fairly short. And here's the quick list I'll give you to try out, but there are so many out there I couldn't begin to list them all. Go for Dread, which uses a Jenga tower for its resolution, 10 Candles, which involves literal lighting of candles, or maybe Good Society, which is a GM-less simulation of Jane Austen novel romantic intrigue. All of these are tabletop role-playing games in a sense, and they push that definition of what people are usually comfortable saying is a tabletop role-playing game. And there's a really important lesson to take from these, even if you're making a very crunchy game like Pathfinder. It's to not take anything as sacrosanct in game design. Unlike in video games, where you're very bound to the platform you're building on, where there's this underlying code or structure if you're making something in Unreal or using Godot. With tabletop role-playing games, the sky's the limit. The only limit is what you can put on the page as directions to the people at a table to follow. And these odd games, ones that really push that definition, are going to flex your designer brain to get you to maybe abandon what you think is a default or required for any given role-playing game. And that is a high level of unlock that you will have as a designer. And I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it, the strength of tabletop role-playing game is the diversity of thought, the disparate designs you'll see across so many different games. I don't believe it's productive to try to categorize things as a role-playing game or not, or is this a rules-light game or a crunchy game? All that definition is often not all that productive, even though I've used some of the terms throughout this video. It's all about learning what's along that spectrum, the continuum of design, learning from previous designers what worked and what didn't, and adapting that to your own game. You shouldn't be beholden to anything in design. You shouldn't think that anything has to be included in a tabletop role-playing game, whether that's dice or using cards or character sheets or anything under the sun. And that leads naturally into my reasoning for not including D&D 5e or D&D 2024 in either of these lists. There's really two reasons I didn't include them. The first is its ubiquity in the space. Pretty much everybody knows how D&D works, especially the most recent editions. They are everywhere, people are super familiar with them, there are so many YouTube channels providing insights into them as to their design or how to homebrew them and how to run them, that my assumption is if you're watching this video, you already have a pretty firm grasp about what D&D 5e is about. And more importantly, I actually don't think there's any good lessons to be extracted from the current edition of Dungeons & Dragons. And that's not saying I think it's a bad system. I play D&D 5e or 5.5 all the time, still have a ton of fun. I don't run it as much as I used to, but I still play it, still have a good time. But it's because the system itself hasn't really integrated any substantive changes over the last decade. It's not really pushing forward in anything specific that you could easily extract from looking at that rules system alone. That's not to say there's nothing to learn from Dungeons & Dragons as a whole, but that design journey would be its own long trek, because you'd want to start from the original red box and work your way through each edition, each iteration leading up to D&D 2024, because that's where there are interesting lessons to be learned. What it is to be Dungeons & Dragons, what that game is, has changed wildly over the years. So it's important to see how a single brand, a single game, can change so dramatically and yet still not be all that different from what it was at the outset. That's a fascinating journey to go on, but one that would require a little bit more dedication than just flipping open one book and trying to learn from it. So that's why D&D isn't included here. But if you do want to go on that challenging journey, try to read every edition, because I think that is a good lesson to be learned. There is good meat to be extracted from such a process. Now, I'm not your dad, I can't tell you what to do or not to do, and this list is highly subjective. It's what I think would make for good advanced reading for tabletop game design. But when I polled my community, I got so many different recommendations, it's absolutely wonderful. And just like in my previous video, down below there's going to be a link to the master list of RPGs that my community thought would be worth reading. So click that link below if you'd like to see just what else was out there, because my choices didn't necessarily line up with the majority of what people suggested in my Discord server. And if you're interested in continuing this conversation, or maybe you're working on a game and want to bounce ideas off of me or other designers, consider joining the Tales from Elsewhere Discord server. There are people hanging out all the time just talking shop and helping each other with game design. And if you'd like to get an additional video every week, patrons get my Sheriff's Office Hours, which I record unedited and unscripted each weekend, where I go over the previous week's video. And it's a way for you to get additional meat out of my conversations. All the proceeds from the Patreon page go to the creatives that work on my game and the YouTube channel. So the editing and artwork, all that goes to them. And so if you want to consider supporting us in that way, it means a lot. Regardless, I'm glad you stuck around, and I will hope to catch you next week here on Tales from Elsewhere.